Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Myslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. Daniel Wiseman, known on Twitter as @SteakandIron, is a 32-year-old engineer in Northern California. Daniel has previously tried a low-cost vegan diet and became fat, sick, and in his words, an old man. Daniel decided to question dogma and myths around nutrition, health, and more. He ultimately relieved those health issues with a keto/carnivore diet and now spreads the word through Twitter. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
I'm glad to be here. Heck of an introduction. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. I've enjoyed your snarky and intelligent comments over the years on Twitter, and excited to dig into things with you.
Yeah, me too. This is going to be fun, and I'm kind of honored to be here because I was looking through the rest of the guests on the show, and you're seeing doctors and authors and people that lost 200 pounds, and then there's me who basically just cracks jokes on Twitter. So this is fun. This is very cool.
Well, thrilled to have you. Daniel, why don't we just start a little bit with your health story, and what kind of got you into this space?
Sure. Let's start way back. I was a fairly active kid. I had, karate classes and dance and all the stuff that kids do. And I was in, decent shape going into high school, and then studies and everything caught up, got into college, moved out. I opted to get a job and pay my way through college rather than take out a loan. That's something I just chose to do. And I perhaps foolishly chose to live in the most expensive place in the world. I live in Northern California. So that didn't leave a whole lot of time to focus on anything beyond work and school. And that led me to basically eat whatever I could get my hands on and afford, which was mostly garbage. And that led me to, at the end of my college career, be, in the possession of a very nice degree, a piece of paper that says I know how to do math pretty well, but really not that much in the way of health. The activity had gone basically down to nothing. I was quite obese. I was wearing pants in the 40s, 40 or 42 that were already getting tight. And now that I found myself with a degree and a decent job and enough time to sort of devote to my physical well-being, and not just my mental aptitude, I decided to kind of, pursue health. And it started out with, at the time, this whole gluten-free thing was sort of popular. So I would move into recipes that were very much like the same sort of traditional American diet, garbage of burgers and enchiladas and pizza, but gluten-free variants of it, black bean brownies, that kind of garbage. I didn't really see any success from that. Moved into, the internet space and sort of asked them, well, how do you be healthy? And it became very apparent to me that the word on the street was that we all would be perfect, healthy vegans if only we had enough willpower to do it. And nothing ever goes wrong. And the only reason you're not vegan is because you're a weak, hedonistic, evil person. So I just said, okay, I'll give this a shot. And it made a lot of sense. It was pretty straightforward and easy to do. Basically, don't eat anything that comes from an animal. And I did. It was largely a peasant's diet, a lot of beans and rice, vegetables that were on sale. Olive oil was mainly my fat source. It wasn't a low-fat vegan diet. But I think probably the biggest health problem I had besides my obesity leading into this was my very low energy, which is, not just a problem for like getting work done or getting studying, done, but a very concrete health problem that I have fallen asleep while driving more than once. And I'm very happy that, just by a flip of a coin, I did not run off the road into a tree or into a family.
Wow.
So that was already an issue. And when I went to this to this vegan way of living, that was the first thing I noticed. Maybe within about a week is my energy had tanked below where it already was, which was at a very low level. I was getting 10 hours of sleep a night, waking up tired, going through the day tired, and falling asleep basically as soon as I got home and was able to stuff some kind of food in my face. And that got worse on a vegan diet. I really did give it the old college try, but it just seemed very, I mean, I didn't buy into this sort of, the dogma behind it, the whole, like, the religion, you're saving the world, whatever. Frankly, I didn't care. I just wanted to be thin. So I started reading more online, and I'm like, okay, how do you get fit? You run. I don't really like running. What else is there? Okay, there's weightlifting. Weightlifting is for bodybuilders. So I found myself at bodybuilding.com, and I learned about barbell training. And I found out that really did seem to work for me, even though I'd been very inactive for a long period of my life, maybe 10 years of time where I'd done really no exercise to speak of. And I never really got to the point where I couldn't drop and do 15 push-ups, which is not, an amazing task. But for somebody who's quite obese and, gets winded walking up a flight of stairs, I still had some degree of strength, and my body worked well with that. So I got into the bodybuilding.com communities. They had a few different ideas about nutrition. I started to learn what nutrition was. And, what is a fat? What is a protein? What is a carbohydrate? What do they do? Where do you get them? What is milk? Is that carbohydrates? Is that, I don't know. So I learned about that, and I looked deeper into the nutrition of it. And there was a sub board called Keto, and I'd never heard of keto before. I'd heard of ketones in just my college biochemistry classes, but it was more like, here's what they are. They exist in the body, and that's about it. But what I saw on these boards talking about keto initially was people who were living through a lifetime of extremely poor health and energy, and obesity to a level I didn't get to. They're talking people 300, 400, 500 pounds, losing 100 or 200 pounds in a relatively short period of time, over the course of maybe a year. And more importantly, seeing that their energy had come back. And this kind of went against everything I'd ever heard before. You need carbohydrates for energy, yada, yada. And of course, in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, this sounds like that Atkins thing, which is going to clog your arteries. I don't know. But at this point, I'm in my mid-20s. I feel like crap. I look like crap. And I'm like, all right, if this is going to kill me, at least I'll leave a pretty corpse. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to kill me in a couple of years. So let's see where it goes. And really got doubled down to the barbell training and this keto thing. And saw within the course of a couple months, massive changes in my subjective well-being. I lost a lot of weight very quickly, as most people do when they drop the carbs out of their diet. I started sleeping much better. I'd wake up in the morning and I would not need to set my alarm for an hour before I left the house, for that slow waking up process. I'd be able to sort of jump out of bed, get dressed, and get along with the day, which was brand new for me. I could read a book without falling asleep, which is also new for me. I was not falling asleep at the wheel anymore, obviously, which is, a tremendous benefit. So I think, at that point, I'm like, there's really kind of something to this. And I didn't really give it much study from there on out. I just sort of like, okay, I don't eat bread and rice and potatoes, and I'll eat a lot of, keto versions of junk food, a lot of keto cheesecakes and cookies and muffins and all, almond flour bought at Costco by the kilogram. But it worked out well for me for a good long while. And I got down, below 200 pounds for the first time in my adult life. And I started liking the way I look. I started liking the way I felt. And I just said, okay, this keto thing is just sort of what I do. And I started moving away from the garbage food, food substitutions into more of a whole food keto. Still definitely very high in plants. At the time, I was very much, of the Michael Pollan, eat food, not too much, mostly plants sort of thing, but on a low carb variant of that. And, again, moving from the junk food to a whole food keto, there was another sort of noticeable step of improvement of my overall health. I realized at this point that cheesecake isn't a health food just because you made it with stevia and almonds, right? So I sort of got to that point, and that's where I lived for a good long while. But I still had these kind of intermittent health problems. I would, be subject to gastric distress, diarrhea, every so often, just seemingly without, warning. I would have occasional joint pain. I've got a back injury that I've been nursing for some years. That would flare up at times. And then maybe, 3 years ago, I started learning about this whole they called it zero carb back then, which is sort of a, misnomer because, they would eat things like cheese and that has carbs in it, but, it omitted the plant kingdom entirely. And my first reaction was, you all are a bunch of damn children. Grow up, eat your fucking vegetables. It's like, there's literally 10,000 vegetables that you can eat, and there's 100 different ways of preparing each one of them. Suck it up, you're being a wimp. But then I started reading to people like Georgie Ede, and obviously Sean Baker came to the forefront of it, and started doing world-class athleticism, of my kind of athleticism with this carnivorous diet. I'd always seen world-class athletes, in terms of endurance sport being very, very low carb or near carnivore, but then I started seeing this glycolytic stuff and this power stuff on a zero carb diet with really no kind of at least as best as I can tell, consequences whatsoever. So I said, man, there's kind of something to this. So I started reducing my plant intake, sort of dipping my foot in the pool here, and I noticed that when I eliminated raw vegetables from my diet, I would eat these big punch bowl salads and stuff. That was something that was kind of a cornerstone of what I would eat. Go get the big, 1 pound box of the, tender greens or whatever from Safeway, and that would be dinner with a big piece of meat on top. But eliminating that, I didn't have the upset stomach anymore. Overnight, I stopped getting it. And it never occurred to me that was the cause of it. I would always assume that, I'm eating too much fat. Fat is what upsets your stomach. I eat this big greasy meal. You go eat Taco Bell or whatever, and it's the taco grease or whatever that's upsetting your stomach. And I realized that's not the case. I even did an experiment during my carnivory. I said, I'm going to literally go completely hog wild on it. I was in Austin, Texas, where you get the best smoked beef in the world. And I went to a brisket house, I think it was Micklethwaite's Meats, which is a great place I recommend if you're in the Austin area. And I got, I think it was 2 pounds of brisket and 2 pounds of smoked beef ribs. And this is after cooking weight. So it's probably, 50% more than that would be like the gross weight if you were to buy it at the store. So you're talking, 6-7 pounds of gross weight meat. And I ate it all. So, 7,000 calories, probably 400, 500 grams of fat. And I had no problem doing it because it was delicious. I don't know if you ever had like real Austin, Texas smoked beef. It is outstanding. It is the only thing. It's the only thing that's ever actually lived up to the hype in my experience. Everything else is, it's so great. That's okay. But the smoked brisket and the smoked ribs are just blew my mind.
Yeah, so good.
So I did it, and I expected to at least, have some kind of stomach upset. And the only thing I got from it was this profound, euphoria. I felt so nourished and so strong. I finished this massive meal, and you'd think it'd be like after Thanksgiving where you wouldn't want to do anything, but it wasn't. I was ready to go hit the gym. Once the physical sense of fullness settled down, and wouldn't to puke, but I was like, oh my God, there's really something to it. And even hours later, the next day, no negative consequences whatsoever. And I really don't think there's anything on this planet I could have eaten in that enormous, ridiculous quantity, which, I don't recommend people do. I'm not a huge dude at this point. This is not that long ago. I was about 170 pounds. And this is, 2 or 3 days worth of food, realistically, all in one sitting. But I had no negative consequences from it whatsoever. And that sort of solidified it in my mind that this is the food my body wants to eat. And the more I sort of read into the biochemistry and the people who are doing the experiments and what is actually in plants, how plants behave, how plants evolved, how we've changed plants to be able to consume them, it became apparent to me that plants are not food. Plants are something you add to food for whatever reason, maybe to supplement the food due to a lack of availability, or for medicinal purposes, or for additional hedonistic pleasure or whatever. But that's not what the food is. That is an adjunct, and that sort of got me to where I am now. And I've celebrated 2 birthdays in a row of a BMI that's normal. I'm relatively pain free. I recover from my workouts very quickly. I sleep like a baby. Even though I don't need to get very much sleep anymore, I focus on my work to a degree I never thought I'd be capable of. I'm, making considerably more money now than I ever have before because I'm able to perform at a much higher level. Frankly, I could not imagine my life being anywhere near where it is right now if I hadn't gone down this path, done this level of self-experimentation, considered that I had been fed a line of bullshit and that what I knew up to this point was wrong. And, I'm very grateful to be where I am.
Yeah, that's super impressive, Daniel. And thanks for sharing your story. And I'm really impressed by folks who are so willing to self-experiment and go out and find things out for yourself. And something I hear all the time is, you're never going to find a randomized controlled trial to tell you the perfect diet. But just your willingness. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to say right now, though, I don't think that it would be fair to say that the perfect human diet would be one of exclusively ruminant muscle meat, because that wouldn't have been the diet we actually grew up on. But it seems to be a very good starting point for most people.
Yeah.
And, then you sort of add things and find out what you tolerate or what you thrive on beyond that. I don't like people who get super religious about this. You post a picture of steak and it's got some parsley on top and people go, "Oh, you've got weeds on your steak. What's all that green stuff?" Settle down. I know we don't want to, take this whole dogmatism and religious fervor to the other end of the spectrum. We're about health. I mean, nobody in this community necessarily, at least I would hope, actually cares what anybody else eats. We just want to see people get healthy, and we found a way that works for us and we're willing to share.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's one of the things I really like about the carnivore movement is, at least for now, there's small amount of infighting and there's some, fighting against the vegans, but it doesn't seem to judge people or box people or exclude people as heavily as other dietary movements. And I'm hoping that, folks can really focus and keep it in that direction of being like, hey, this works for a ton of people. Hey, try it out. You might feel great. You want to eat something else, go for it. It's up to you.
Yeah. And I think that sort of mindset that we have is, kind of exemplified by the overall carnivore opinion of people like Carrie Diulis, right? She's a vegan, totally plant-based, has no animals in her diet at all, but she's looking at it from a scientific point of view, now with this religious fervor, she doesn't dismiss studies just because it doesn't happen to fit her particular worldview. And, there are people who have made religious decisions or ethical decisions or whatever the case may be, just personal decisions that have, their lives do not involve animal products, but they're respectful of those who do. And I think that the whole carnivore community is very much open to people like that and welcoming of them and accepting of them. Whereas I don't see that being as true on the other side of the dietary spectrum.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that's a great time to transition to your Twitter account and some of the battles you've gotten in with. So first of all, I guess let's just start with, what inspired you to make a Twitter account and get out there and start talking about these types of messages?
Yeah, so I got on Twitter because it seems like it is the platform that allows as few layers between a regular person like me and somebody who I admire, or somebody who I want to interact with. A comedian, an actor, a politician, a dietitian, a doctor, whatever. But it allows me to communicate with them directly, or at least absorb information from them directly without any kind of intermediary. And I think Twitter is very unique and very powerful in that way. So I wanted to be able to, interact with these people who are in the low carb sphere directly, and immediately as they produce new material, be alerted of it, ask them questions, and I ate a lot of steak. I lifted a lot of iron, so I picked the name Steak and Iron.
Yeah, good for you. And on that, Daniel, I'm just curious. You mentioned kind of your keto journey, and it doesn't sound like it, but were you ever, trying the Keto Gains method or involved in that community? It seems like it would kind of fit with some of your ideas.
Yeah, actually, back in the Reddit Keto Gains community, me and Lewis were on there fairly regularly before it kind of blew up. I haven't really been an active participant in that particular community for a long while, but I definitely endorse their methods. They're very much, scientifically based. And I think that their opinion that the low protein recommendations and the goal to have the highest possible ketone readings in, we'll say, the mainstream, I don't know if you can call keto mainstream at any point, but I'll say the mainstream keto advice sort of groups is just totally on point. I don't think the people that are getting A lot of resistance training are benefiting by having, 50, 60 grams of protein a day. I don't think that that's optimized. And I think that, his training methods and everything are very, very good. And, I love what he does.
Yeah.
But I haven't been super active in either the Facebook group there or the Reddit group in a long time, even though I am a member and I poke my head in every so often.
Yeah, that makes sense. And getting back to Twitter for a bit, why do you think so many vegans sort of reach out to you, target you, and try to start fights with you on Twitter?
Because I'm loud. I'm not the kind of person who immediately like blocks or mutes somebody. I tend to have fun with them. Because it's funny to me how much of somebody's identity gets tied up into what they eat. They literally think they're saving the world. Imagine that. Imagine the mindset of somebody where they think that going to Burger King and ordering a salad instead of ordering a burger is somehow saving the planet. Think of the mindset of that kind of person. Of course, they're going to be, worthy of ridicule. So, I'm going to have fun with them. And because I know for a fact I'm not going to convince somebody who's already at the mindset that they're going to go after, some nobody on Twitter, me, and start yelling at them for eating meat and how they're ruining the world. I know I'm never going to convince them of anything, but if I'm entertaining enough, maybe somebody who's kind of on the fence will go, hang on, wait a minute. I don't know if I want to be in the camp of this guy who's comparing a guy to Hitler for eating a steak. I don't know if that's the community I want to associate with.
Yeah.
And so I like to shine a light on the ridiculousness of it. And I'll shine a light on the ridiculousness of, the outright religious carnivore community too, because I think that's kind of silly as well. But people who have wrapped up their identity so tightly into what they eat, it's funny. So, I will respond, I will tease, I will poke and prod and pick apart the studies and show people how ridiculous they're being and how little science is actually behind what they think is, quote unquote, just common sense or quote unquote, as we all know, that kind of nonsense, and say, look, asshole, you might not know everything. Just consider that for a moment. And I can have fun with it from there. And, sometimes I can string people along for a while. Sometimes I get immediately blocked. But, that's just sort of the space I occupy.
Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy watching it, and definitely I think you're doing great work. And do you have
humor is a very effective way to communicate, I think. So I think that despite my best intentions, I've done a lot of good.
Yeah, totally agree. It's a great point. And do you have, you've probably seen some really ridiculous stuff on Twitter. Do you have sort of some most memorable tweets or moments you've had?
Absolutely I do. I remember the date. I'll never forget it. It was July 26, 2018. Let me take you back in time. There was, I think just the previous week, there was some kind of low carb conference. It may have been San Diego, but don't quote me on that. And, the lectures and the YouTube presentations and stuff were hitting the web, and they were being promoted on Twitter. And Siobhan Huggins, whom I love dearly, had given a talk and about her lipidology and her studies she'd done with Dave Feldman. And there was a picture of her giving a presentation, and she looked great. She's beautiful. She's got her floral dress on. Brilliant woman, just standing there educating a whole room full of people. And there was this vegan fuck, and he's like respectful living or some absolute garbage handle he had. And he's like, oh, looks like she really enjoys her lipids. And that just, it's like it's like this guy insulted my little sister. And I just flew off the handle, and I was like, look, you fuck. Okay, doing the exact opposite of what you maintain people should doing. She's lost 75 pounds. And you're going to tease her because she doesn't fit your exacting standards of feminine beauty. Eat my entire ass. That was my quote. And the reaction from that was fun enough. But about an hour, 2 hours later, Michael Eads, Dr. Michael Eads, MD, Mr. Protein Power himself, retweets me and says, eat mine too. So on July 26th, 2018, a man who was in school for longer than I've had a driver's license went on Twitter and told a vegan to eat his ass. And that was the funniest thing. I still laugh about it. That was the funniest thing that has ever happened to me. I mean, just behind Michael or behind Atkins, Michael Eads is one of these, huge names in the community. And he posts that, and it just absolutely killed me. That was the funniest thing that have ever happened. I will never forget that. I want that story told at my funeral. That was killer.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
That is definitely my favorite Twitter interaction by a country fucking mile. That just killed me. And it's still funny. Like, I still laugh about it. I'd just be like driving home some days and just be like, I remember the time Mike Lee retweeted me and told the vegan to eat his ass. God, that was good.
Yeah, that's so funny. And completely unproductive and inappropriate by whoever tweeted that. It's just like not helping anyone or making any point.
Exactly. And they talk out of both sides of their mouth. I'm not speaking for the entire vegan community. All right. There's this perception that I don't like vegans. I have no problem with vegans. What I have a problem with is like these evangelicals and these feverish, angry people who speak out of both sides of their mouth, because there's this overlap where they're like, oh, we are supporting all female rights. That's why we don't, think you should eat eggs and milk, because that's exploiting women of all species. And then they go and insult somebody for their looks because they don't fit a particular kind of feminine beauty. What is wrong with you? How can you not have that level of self-awareness to realize that you are a shitty person?
Yeah, that's crazy.
It drives me nuts. I mean, that was one of the very few times I legitimately was angry. Most of the time I'm behind the keyboard, I'm laughing. But that time I was honestly mad. I mean, if this person was a real person, it would be difficult for me to be in the same room with them.
Yeah. And it's a shame because I think, like you said, most people in the vegan community are reasonable and polite and friendly people, and they're doing it out of their best nature. But of course, you're going to have that 1% to 5% who are just totally crazy.
Yeah, I think that happens. The vegan message resonates with them because they have this very deep sense of empathy and justice. And I think that it's been manipulated the wrong way. And I'd like to be able to sit down and say, okay, this is what you want to achieve. This is the world you want to see. We don't necessarily agree there. We don't necessarily disagree there. But what we disagree with are whether or not the tools and the techniques you want to use to achieve those means are actually going to get you there better than mine. So then we can talk about that. And that's sort of, the Lierre Keith re-examination of one's own life and, the moral stances. Can they stay the same while the actions taken change?
Yeah. And for folks who haven't read it, Vegetarian Myth is an excellent book by her, where she dispels a lot of vegan myths. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Daniel?
Yeah, sure. So my personal sort of political philosophy is one of complete rejection of the initiation of violence. And that's a personal choice. I just don't think there's ever a good argument to aggress somebody. And, this was something I'm kind of non-negotiable about. Like, people can say anything they want to me. I'm never going to hit them. But if somebody hits me, I'll defend myself. That's basically where I am. Don't hit people. Don't take their stuff. But the argument was presented to me, well, why do you draw the line at the species? Like, I wouldn't say it's okay for me to do evil things to somebody because they're from a different country or a different city or a different family or a different religion or a different ethnicity group. I mean, that would all be very obvious to me. You don't do that. We're all humans. Or why do I draw the line at the species? And that was something I wrestled with, honestly, for a long time. And I wasn't really able or willing to give up meat because I knew that I didn't want to sacrifice my health. But why didn't I want to sacrifice a little bit of my health to maybe save the health of lots of other animals of a different species? It's a tricky question, right? If that's the position you've taken. And Lierre Keith, for those who don't know, she was a very staunch vegan for a long period of time, I think 2 decades plus, and began to see her health deteriorate and started to really examine, where does food come from? Can you be truly vegan? Can you separate yourself from the exploitation and death in nature? And if you look at the way that, your vegetables are grown, you're using bone and blood meal to fertilize them, or you're using nitrate fertilizers that are, dug up with fossil fuels that have, ecological impacts and destroy ecosystems there. The agriculture itself, you completely destroy wetlands to grow corn and soy, and, the death of the animals that go on underneath all of that. The animals that are never born in the first place because they have no habitat anymore. So you're not able to actually divorce yourself from that. And then it's reframing yourself as not this exploiter of nature or this consumer of nature, but instead a part of nature. You can't look at it as if you're a pyramid and you're at the top, but it's a circle. If you look at the way animals are actually raised, and there are some practices in terms of high density feedlots that I think introduce more suffering into the world than is absolutely necessary. But most actual feeding operations are fairly low density, and an animal enjoys a happy, productive life because that, honestly, at the end of the day, yields more for the farmer than one of high density, disease-ridden conditions where animals are not going to be fit for sale at the end of it. And being able to look at that way of sort of perceiving the world and saying, I'm all part of this. I'm going to die. Animals are going to eat me. Animals need to die to make plants. Plants need to die to make animals. There's a whole, there's microorganisms, there's macroorganisms. There's this whole cycle that happens, and you don't get to divorce yourself from it just because you think it's ugly, just because you think it's gross, just because somebody told you it's bad. Examine it, see where it actually comes from, and say, am I actually doing more harm than good? I mean, that's a huge problem with people in general. Is people developing a solution for a problem that ends up being worse than the problem itself. You look at alcohol prohibition back in the 30s. I mean, it's a good example of something completely with good intentions blowing back and causing way more harm than it ever intended to. So that allowed me to reframe it and said, okay, I'm put your money where your mouth is. Do your best to consume ethical meat as to the best of your abilities, but you're not doing bad by living the way nature intended you to.
Yeah.
Where I am now.
I obviously agree. And I think, you do a good job of dispelling some of that. And also one thing I like so much about your Twitter is you capture people with humor. And I think that's a really effective tool. But another thing you do really effectively is taking data and research from a lot of top scientists out there, people like Dr. Eads and everyone else on Twitter, and you sort of dispel it to a lot of the key messages. Can you talk about why that's really important?
Because we're not all scientists. I've had a very broad education in engineering, and I understand for example everything that goes on under the hood of a car. But unless I'm talking to a mechanic, they don't necessarily care. And the same thing works. If you're talking to a regular human who may have, be not college educated at all, or maybe even be a young person, and explain, here's really the reality of what we know and how we know it. And this is the weight of the evidence. And here's, say a simplified view of the biochemistry. I would tell people like, okay, why doesn't eating fat make you fat? Well, my greatly simplified version of that is, well, if all you're eating is fat, or if you're eating primarily fat, your body needs to use fat for energy. And it's going to have less of a differentiation between the fat on your plate and the fat on your body. That's why it's easier to eat a little bit less and have more energy when you're eating a lot of fat. And that makes sense to people. Say, oh, okay, that makes sense. But that message is not really conveyed in, normal nutrition or in, everybody's just, upbringing. So I think being a communicator of science for people who don't care about these long strings of, alphanumerics, of all these different protein codes and these different metabolic pathways and these diagrams of the metabolic processes where you've got arrows pointing out in every other direction. Most people don't really care. Some of us are huge nerds. Some of us want to get into the weeds on that. Most people just want to be healthy. Most people really don't care how the sausage is packed as long as at the end of the day, they feel good and they like the way they look.
Yeah.
I think this is why you see people do totally stupid things, in this pursuit of health, because really that's all they care about. You see people, I've heard of people eating, cotton balls to fill up their stomachs so they're not hungry, so that they lose weight, or, taking, going online and buying, amphetamines with Bitcoin to try to, drop weight or whatever. You hear, every couple of weeks, somebody dies of a drug overdose because they're doing something stupid in a pursuit of health. Bodybuilders and models and all, it drives me nuts because there is a tremendous pressure on everybody to look a certain way, and everybody wants to feel a certain way, and they will do anything stupid that somebody tells them who they trust to do it. And, I just try to give my perspective on that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and this is one of the problems with the internet. If you're a stupid person trying to find a stupid answer, you will find it.
Yep.
And
a lot of loud, stupid people.
Yeah,
a lot of loud, stupid people, and there's definitely the signal rising above the noise isn't necessarily the right one.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, one thing that you dispel on your account all the time is a lot of myths around calories. And one great example of this I loved was when you showed your giant birthday steak. So can you talk about kind of both of those topics?
Oh, yeah. Okay. My birthday steak is, for one, the best thing I've ever cooked, period, like full stop. It is the best single thing I've ever eaten. Not the best meal I've ever had. I had one meal that was better than that. But, so I decided my wife is a phenomenal baker, and she's cooked me a birthday cake ever since we've been together. But this year I decided I don't really want one. If I'm going to have something nice and special, we're going to go to the finest butcher in the area. We're going to buy the best steak they have, and I'm going to cook it. And it's going to cost us less than us going out to eat, going out to a fancy pants dinner. I've already been to every fancy restaurant in the local area. I don't really want to go back to any of them. I've experienced them, but
yeah,
let's do that. So for my birthday this year, we went to a local high-end butcher that happens to carry American-raised Wagyu, which is usually a hybrid between a Japanese breed of cow and a Black Angus. So it's a little bit meatier, a little bit larger breed of cow, but very, heavily marbled, very fatty. And I got a 40-ounce, it's 2.5 pound ribeye steak, and it was $100. And by some measures, 4,000 to 5,000 calories, depending. And I'm guessing that's about right because it was extremely fatty. And I cooked that in a sous vide water bath, and I got it cooked to a perfect medium rare, seared it on a cast iron pan, and just about fell out of my chair when I took a bite of it because it was so damn good. And I mean, to sit down and eat 4,000 to 5,000 calories in a sitting is a lot of food. But here's why the calories don't matter. All right, well, that's a silly statement. Here's why I wasn't concerned about the calories and why I'm generally not concerned about the calories. Because I ate that steak, and I loved it. I enjoyed every single bite. The last bite was absolutely as good as the first bite. I was very full afterwards. And then I didn't eat for about 36 hours. Not because I was, doing penance or, because I was punishing myself for having such an outrageously decadent meal. That was not what was going on. I just simply wasn't hungry the entire next day. And then into noon, about noon the day after that was when I finally started getting hungry again. And that's the power of consuming food that is actually nourishing your body. Most people will have, a story of them going out to a Chinese buffet or eating an entire pizza, and ice cream and stuff like that. And they can eat 4,000 or 5,000 calories, but they wake up hungry the next day. And, your body has already taken all of this nutrition, or I'll say energy, and not a whole lot of nutrition, in Ben and Jerry's, but this energy and just, the huge insulin spike and all the, chemicals that are going on in your body, it shuttles it all into your fat cells, and there's nothing left to actually do any work in your body. So your body starts calling out for more. And you can't beat hunger day in and day out. I don't believe you can. And you can put it off for a little bit. You can say no for a while, but yo-yo diets are such a known phenomenon because, besides eating, what more important biological urge can you have? If you don't eat, you die. If you hold your breath for a couple minutes, you're going to be getting a, really strong instinctive, drive to start breathing again. And food is the same way. And if you eat too little, you're going to eat too much later. Nobody has that iron will.
Yeah.
For years at a time. And there's people who, will do that for years at a time, but eventually the wheels fall off. And it's so hard unless they've just made a lifestyle out of it, which is something different altogether. But, to white knuckle it all day, every day, it's not sustainable. It's sad that people live that way. And when you move to a diet that is nourishing and is, I will say mostly meat. It's not entirely meat, mostly meat, and is giving your body what it really needs. And you're actually listening to your body's signals because it's easy. I could eat that every single day if I wanted to. I could eat 5,000 calories a day, and I probably would gain a substantial amount of weight if I did that because I wouldn't be listening to my body's signals. But if I'm actually listening to my body's signal and I'm nourishing it if I overeat, all it takes is just more time before I get hungry again. And that's really something amazing and something that most people who are on a more conventional diet don't experience and don't understand.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And I think you hit on it so well there, Daniel, that getting to a place of intuitive eating is something so few people experience and so many people crave. And it's really magical when it happens. And I just want to say from personal experience, I've tried the calorie restriction. I've tried counting calories, and as much motivation and as strong of habits and as expertly as I implement it, no matter what, just like you say, hunger comes back around in one form or another. And it's not that I go and binge on potato chips and Oreos. It's that literally my mind convinces itself that calorie counting is stupid, which it is. And I go back to eating ad libitum healthy foods, but just not saying I'm going to keep eating 15 to 1600 calories every single day and tracking it all in MyFitnessPal. It's just not sustainable.
And I look at there's been plenty of societies in history that were, for because of the weather or their physical location or whatever, they happen to be in a very, I'll say bountiful food environment. The Plains Indians and stuff that have basically access to as much buffalo meat as they could ever possibly eat, or even certain parts of Africa where there's a lot of ground tubers and herds of animals and elk-like animals, whatever. I can't remember the names of them, urdus and stuff like that. That they would really never actually be hungry, and if they wanted to overeat constantly, they would be able to do so. But they didn't have obesity. Aside from, I'm sure some people had metabolic dysregulation of some description, or, parasitic infections that keep them eating constantly. But this is the outlier. They didn't have this urge to constantly eat and gain body fat the same way we do now, despite having abundance.
Yeah.
And we can point to these societies, and we can say, why didn't they do it? And it's because their bodies just simply didn't want it. And one of the ways I just gauge how good food is for me is how long does it take for me to get hungry again? It's like everybody knows about it. You eat a big plate of Chinese food covered in sugar and with rice and everything else, you're hungry later. People joke about it.
Yeah.
But, it's true. Your body goes through all these calories and it says, okay, well, I got all these calories, but I don't have X, Y, and Z to go ahead and finish all these metabolic processes. So keep on eating, and maybe as you mow through these troughs of food, you'll actually hit by accident a couple of the nutrients you need.
Yeah.
And to be free from that is just the most amazing experience, because I definitely was just born hungry. In my old days when I was obese, I would wake up hungry. I would eat breakfast. I would remain hungry until lunch. I'd eat lunch while thinking about what I'd eat for dinner. I'd eat dinner and then go to sleep hungry, regardless of how much food was eaten, if I was dieting or not dieting. And just to be free of that is, I never thought I would be. I really just thought this is just my life. I'm one of the people that's always hungry. I'm going to have to deal with that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Nothing's wrong with it.
I've been the same way, and I have a giant appetite. And Daniel, would love to just ask a few questions how you practically implement some of these things. So you've been weightlifting with keto for a long time. Do you supplement with electrolytes, or how do you sort of think about that with regards to optimizing your gym performance?
What I have found works well for me is I buy, I get the pink Himalayan salt, but in big rocks. They're maybe about the size of like a pea. You put them in the salt grinder. I buy those, and I just take a little handful of those, maybe a half hour before the gym, and then just take them like pills.
Okay.
Just right down the hatch.
Yeah.
And I started doing that because I noticed I would sometimes, particularly if I was doing fasted workouts, I had to move my workout schedule to be first thing in the morning now, just the way my commute works. And I found that I was getting very lightheaded and feeling dizzy after a very heavy set. I need to kind of take a deep breath and, try not to fall over, that kind of sensation. And after I started supplementing the salt, I found that really went away. I've been taking magnesium in the evenings. I'm not sure it's actually doing anything for me. It's just I got a gigantic Costco-sized bottle of it, so I've been taking it until it's gone. I'm probably not going to reorder it. I was getting foot cramps in the evening sometimes, but those went away when I started drinking less water. And so I don't know if I was just, so that was an experiment. I started a few months ago. Just, what happens if I don't drink, gallons of water a day? What happens if I just sort of sip on my little 16-ounce bottle throughout the day? And I noticed my foot cramps went away. So maybe I was flushing out too much salt or whatever throughout the day. But yeah, that's pretty much the only supplement I take.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know you also travel a fair amount for work. And you've talked about this briefly on other podcasts and on Twitter, but how do you make this type of eating work well, and sustain it well on the road?
Well, I think a lot of people forget that when you're on the road, you can still go to a grocery store. I see a lot of people who are like, oh, what can I get from the drive-thru? What can I do, this, that, and the other thing? And it's like, well, right next to the drive-thru is Safeway, and you can go to the Safeway deli and they'll cut you a big old piece of tri-tip right now. There's no reason you can't do that. You can go get the ready-packed bags of hard-boiled eggs, and those are literally just eggs and salt. Now, those are great. And, you get a half dozen ready-to-eat eggs for $3 usually at the, any local, chain supermarket. You can often find relatively low adulteration, lunch meats, roast beef, pastrami, turkey, if you like that, cheeses, they're all there. And especially if you're on the road and trying to maintain a budget, that's probably the best bang for the buck. Just people always think that when you're going to the grocery store, it's because you're going to take it home and cook it. And I think that's doing yourself a disservice if you live the kind of lifestyle where you do need to travel a lot. So I'd say to people, don't forget grocery stores exist, even if you don't have a kitchen. There's a lot of really good options there.
Yeah, those are all great tips. And I follow a lot of those as well when I'm traveling if I don't have access to something to cook with. And then the other myth I hear a lot, or just a question too, is, how do you make this lifestyle affordable? You're eating steaks all the time. Isn't that like $15 to $30 a pound? How do you make this affordable? And I think you've figured out some great kind of tips around this. So how do you keep it economical?
Yeah, so a ketogenic diet, maybe a subset of that, the carnivore diet, can be either the most expensive or the least expensive diet you do. I mean, aside from maybe like a poverty level, rice and lentils sort of, diet of, near starvation. But, people think that a ketogenic diet is fancy cheeses and macadamia nuts and grass-fed steaks, and it certainly can be. And if that's what you like eating and you're achieving health goals and not ruining your budget by doing it, do it. It's a great way to live. It's rich, it's decadent, it's healthy. But, I came from my college years of being extremely, I won't say poor, because you can't be poor and live in the richest area in the world. I wasn't poor, but I was broke. I didn't have a lot in the way of excess money, and I had to meter every dollar and make every dollar count. And that meant, looking at specials and looking at grocery stores that are not, Sprouts or Whole Foods or even Safeway. Most of your, large urban areas, if you live in a city, they will have these minority-owned markets that cater to different ethnicities, an Indian supermarket or a Chinese supermarket or a Mexican supermarket. And you'll find, maybe different cuts of meat that are more typical of that culture at a greatly reduced price. Organ meats, greatly reduced price. If you go to Safeway, things like liver are considered premium. They're like, oh, fancy pants liver. We're going to, live high on the hog today. But for example, a Mexican supermarket, liver and tripe and beef heart are very inexpensive because these are staples of the culture. And you can get them at great values. And you'll see these, specials where, I've seen, for example, I just bought, pork blade. So, a pork shoulder roast for 77 cents a pound. And people are like, oh, pork this is, omega-6s, whatever. I personally haven't found any issues eating omega-6s in, animal products myself. Data may disagree with that, but I personally seem to do just fine on it. But I could eat, 3 pounds of meat every day for just over $2 a day. So for, 60, 70 bucks a month, I could be on a pretty high caloric surplus, working out, really hard, making gains for $60 a month. And that's a lower food budget than I have ever had at any point, even at my poorest.
Yeah. That's incredible.
So, if you're intelligent, if you're intelligent with how you spend your money and you shop the deals and you have that kind of flexibility and you don't have this regimented thing that says, I need to eat, 2 pounds of ribeye steak and only ribeye steak and only grass-fed ribeye steak every single day, we have a little bit of flexibility with that and say, okay, I can go with maybe ground chuck. I can go with, 70% beef, or I can look at, the manager's clearance section, which is, people forget they even have that. If you go to any of the chain supermarkets, your Lucky's or Safeway or Albertsons or whatever, they have a little section, the manager's clearance. You'll find grass-fed meat there for like $4 a pound. Insane deals, but people just don't look at it because that's not the place you go when you're looking. That's the place you're supposed to go when you're desperate. Well, don't limit yourself like that.
Yeah, that's a gold mine, and those are some great tips, and I definitely echo all of those. You definitely don't have to make this a luxurious or expensive lifestyle. Well, Daniel,
that doesn't mean you need to feel deprived either.
Yeah.
You shouldn't go into this feeling like you're limiting yourself. What you're doing is you're saying, I am going to forego some degree of ridiculous hedonism right now, so that I am going to live a long, happy, and healthy life. And that's sort of where I look at it right now. I want to have feet. I want to have time with my grandchildren more than I want to have this box of Oreos, or more than I want to have this whatever indulgence that happens to be sitting in front of me, tempting me, because I don't look at it as worth it anymore. There's things that are more important, and you really need to sit down and figure out, why are you even doing this in the first place, and keep it in mind. And that makes life so much easier, because then you're not fighting anything. You're just working towards the goal.
Yeah.
You're working towards the future. And that's so much easier than having quote unquote willpower or quote unquote, motivation.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Really examining one's values can be incredibly helpful.
Yep.
Well, Daniel, this has been an excellent conversation. I think folks will get a ton out of this. I really appreciate you taking the time. Where can folks find out more about you, and is there anything else you want to leave them with?
Right now, I exist as the shitposter supreme on Twitter at Steak and Iron. That's my really only online presence right now, but I've got some writings. I've got some things I want to sort of put out there at some point. There may be a blog, there may be a PDF or book or something at some point in the future. But right now, come follow me on Twitter. Say, hey, we'll have some fun. I swear like a sailor, so not safe for kids, but, we'll have a good time.
Yeah. Good for you. Well, I look forward to that other stuff. And in the meantime, I'll link to your Twitter in the show notes. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you very much. Have a great one.
You too. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.